Welcome to Atwood Unleashed 71. First guest of the evening, Billy Hayes, couldn't make it. So we're now bringing in one of our most requested guests ever, resplendent as usual in orange, Matthew Steeples.
I'm
Steeples
wearing.
is... You wearing, Matthew?
I'm wearing the orange jumper, especially for you. I've incurred all the locals asking me why I was wearing an orange jumper on a hot day like this, but especially for your audience, here I am.
I'm looking at the thermometer on my fan right now, and it is 29 degrees. It's getting this hot. This is the last of it, I think, before it's going to cool down because it was up to 40 degrees recently. So Matthew in his orange jumper is doing absolutely great because he must be a bit sweaty there. So if you're not
Well, we've got
familiar,
a bit of a sea breeze here, so that does help.
if you're not familiar with Matthew, then tell them a bit about the Steeples Times.
Well, I'm the publisher of an online daily title called the Steeple Times that we set up in 2012. We write about many different things, but true crime is one of them. We do things like horse racing as well, oligarchs, society, all sorts of different things, food and drink. But our most popular topics are somebody we can't talk about, and a lady called formerly known as Meghan Markle. I think that's if we write about her, we get more traffic than anything else.
What subjects with Meghan Markle have become of the most interest to your subscribers?
Well, our most popular ever article is one asking about her PR person, who I call her PR peddler. As he claims to be a journalist, a man called Omid Scooby, who used to work for Heat magazine and used to hang out with Jodie Marsh. I don't know if you remember her, but a glamour model, and he's now morphed into a mouthpiece for the Duchess of Sussex, and he wrote a book called Finding Freedom. We published an article saying who really is Omid Scooby, and he's somebody who's not quite who he seems. He's not quite the genuine journalist. His article today is simply attacking Tom Bauer for his book on Meghan Markle, saying that Meghan's new podcast is the best thing ever. He just does as he's told, really, and our readers wanted to find out who he really was, to be honest.
So, if anyone's got a question for Matthew, please put it in the chat. We've got one from Joanna. Can Matthew speak about Yankee Wally?
Well, Yankee Wally is somebody who came to my attention through a journalist who you actually met at my house from the Daily Mail in January. She was very interested in her. This lady set up a YouTube channel to talk about her thoughts on Meghan. And this was a Welsh lady who I didn't know what her real name was until later and her past. And she's become one of our biggest supporters. And she gives her opinions on a daily basis, rather like you were. She was cancelled on various channels because there are many people working with the Duchess of Sussex to get rid of anybody who dares criticize this lady or dares question her stories. There's not only her own family who she's trying to cancel, there are a lot of other people who upset her and they don't have any right to speak in her view. And Yankee Wally is a lady, an elder lady in Wales. She ran her own business. She has a daughter. She became interested in this topic and she gave nightly discussions and read out the articles from newspapers. And she does so in a kind of witty Welsh way. And she makes sort of jokes about her own life. And she's become quite an endearing sort of figure in mine. And sadly, a lot of people have witnessed her being cancelled. So we came to join many who supported her.
Sounds like someone we need to get on the podcast, but perhaps in the Patreon section because it's unpalatable for the YouTube algorithm.
I would definitely say that. That's the issue with her, is if she's been given radio shows, she's done many different things, but they don't seem to generally last. Her YouTube channel had a huge following, but it disappeared because there is a man called Christopher Boozy. I don't know if you've encountered him, but he runs a thing called Bot Sentinel, and he ran a campaign against her with the help of Omid Scooby, and the police were involved and all sorts of different matters. But, this is how personal it gets, the situation of this story. It's not just about the war of the royal family. Tom Bower's book was the War of the Windsors, but there's a whole nother level of war on the people who are called the Sussex squaddies, who are the supporters of Meghan, and then the many, many hundreds of thousands who criticize her. And I receive messages from both sides of them, but obviously the ones that seem to like me are obviously the ones that aren't her fans. But I simply ask questions about her behavior. She chose to marry into a royal family, but she thought she could have the rights and privileges, but she didn't want the responsibilities. And I think that's the main issue that people who have a problem with the Duchess of Sussex have with her and her husband, because they want all the security detail, they want everything else, but they don't want to do any of the work. Now, Prince William and his wife, they do what they do, and whether you like them or not, they do seem to be showing willing to participate. Whereas these two, they just moan and groan and complain, and then they want a private life, but then they want to get 100 million, which I don't believe in that number, by the way. I think the numbers are greatly exaggerated, but they want all this money from Spotify and Netflix, but they shot it, but they want a private life. So make up your mind time, I say, of both of them.
Right, I'm going to read the next question that's on the screen, but I'm going to abbreviate the last word so we don't attract algorithmic problems. Can Matthew speak about the FMs? So the FMs, the palm ticklers, we've got 3 podcasts imminent about the FMs that I think people are going to really enjoy. We have a woman coming on who her dad did some evil things. I'll leave that to your imagination. And he was connected, I believe, to a judge and cops in the West Yorkshire FM police, the same police that protected Savile. We've got a prison guard coming on who was run out of the prison and attacked by FMs and ended up losing his job because of the FMs. And we have got Holly, the prison governor, in part 2. She is going to disclose the role of the FMs in the prison service and the guards union and all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of FM content coming your way, viewers, in the next month or so. Now, from the cops and the guards we've interviewed, it does seem like those professions are particularly permeated by the FMs. Do you have any perspective on the FMs?
Well,
Matthew?
I won't say anything that prejudices your channel, but there are groups of people in society who stick together and do things for one another. Now, the FMs, I don't know a huge amount about. I know people who have been involved in it. My own grandfather was briefly one of them, but he didn't like it, so he left. But I would say, look.
Tell us more. Tell us more about that. What did you learn from that?
Well, my grandfather died many, many years ago, but he said that he didn't like the way that they behaved and he didn't want to talk about it. That was all I ever got from him about that subject. But he was part of a community in Manchester, and he, in the workplace in the 1950s and 60s, people did join those things because if you were a certain level of management, you were expected to join whatever you were told to join. And I think, it was very much like going to the golf club. You met certain people, and if you did someone a favor, they did you a favor. I think that's partly what it's about. And the other thing that they do that they laud is their charity work. And I don't know why I'm on it, but I'm on a mailing list from them. Which I get, their press releases about things they do at their hall in central London, their very big place in Covent Garden, and it's all about their events. I've never been to any of them, but they're very keen to try and make themselves out to be part of the community now, and they probably do some good. But rather like Jimmy Savile with his Friday lunch club. Once you have people coming to your orbit and you have something you want to hide, if you've got them in your orbit, you will be able to manipulate them into doing what you want. And there must be a bit of that going on with them, I do believe.
Ash
But
has
I
asked
can't say I have personal experience of them. I know people who are members of it. I have been invited to join such things, but I have always said it's not my thing. I'm any club that would have me, I wouldn't want to join, I think is the way I feel about it. I was a member of the Carlton Club, which was the premier conservative club of Great Britain for a while, and I didn't really feel aligned to it, so I left. That's the only club I've ever joined of that type, and it wasn't for me. I'm very much a loose cannon in my regard, and I like to do my own things. So I'm not really the kind of person that would join such a thing, and I don't think you are either, Sean.
Definitely not a person who would join, even though there are many conspiracy theories that I am already in it. Ash has asked if you could turn off whatever's beeping in your room. Is it your
Whatever is
phone
beeping? It could be my computer.
Let's mute
email
that.
program. I'll quit it.
And a huge thank you to everyone who's sending in questions. We're going to continue. We're going to go over to McCann and the McCanns shortly, but I need to probe Matthew a little bit more about what he's just said, I think, because what's the Carlton Club?
The Carlton Club is a club in St. James's, a gentleman's club that was originally became part of the Conservative Party. It was bombed by the IRA. It's a place where every prime minister, every Conservative leader was automatically made a member. Margaret Thatcher was the first female member of the club because they had to have her because she was a leader of the party. And it's a place where you can go and you can get a cheap drink, cheap food. You get cheap accommodation if you're staying there. It's a beautiful building, but it's now really not that closely linked to the Conservative Party since David Cameron because he didn't like its ethos. And it's become more of a conference centre now, but I haven't been a member of it for many, many years.
What didn't he like about its ethos?
Well, it wasn't the actual Carlton Club's ethos. It was more the way that the fact that I feel the Conservative Party left me. I didn't leave the Conservative Party. I didn't like the Conservative Party as from the moment that Ian Duncan Smith became leader, and I've not supported it ever since then. So I couldn't be a member. I couldn't be a member of the Carlton Club because you have to declare that you're a supporter of the Conservative Party.
So are you saying that London is strewn across London are all kinds of fraternities, houses, clubs, FMs, entities?
Yes, there are different clubs for different organisations. So the Garrick Club, for example, where Boris Johnson held his famous meeting with the owner of the editor, then editor of the Telegraph, which helped him along during some of his troubles. That's primarily judges and actors. To be a member of the Travellers Club, which Terry Waite, for example, that's where I met him. You've got to come from the world of travel and exploration and, things like that. There are all sorts of the RAC clubs about motoring. There's lots of different types of clubs and you pay an annual membership fee and, you meet people there and it is a good place to be introduced to people. And the great benefit is when you travel, you get reciprocal arrangements in other cities and you get cheap accommodation and you get to stay in amazing buildings and you do meet some characters. I have to say such places can be very useful, but equally they're very incestuous. It's not like Jimmy Savile's police club because he was using that to protect himself on a personal level. That was a very much different kind of club.
So to be invited into one of these clubs then, do you have to be from a certain section of society? For example, I'm from Witness.
To be invited into one of these clubs or even one of the clubs, for example, where Meghan Markle, got in her intro into London, Soho House, all of these clubs require that you are introduced. So you have to be brought in by someone who's an existing member and supported by other existing members. So to join the Carlton Club, you have to have a proposer and a seconder. So you have to know at least 2 people. And then they have a book, and you're put in a book, and people can sign in the book for you and support you, or they can put a mark against you and try and stop you. So, yes, you do have to have an inroad.
So people get blacklisted from these places as well.
They can be, and then normally what happens in those places, if the person you've proposed is put on a blacklist, you have to resign yourself because you've introduced somebody bad. So it is a hierarchy. It's a very curious system, but I think it's a lot more relaxed than it was. But then you've got all these modern clubs, like, for example, Soho House, which is full of media people and, you know, musicians and artists. And, you know, they have, you know, they have a hierarchy more based on money. It's if you're very rich, you get in. There are many different levels of these clubs. So, for example, in Chelsea in London, there's the Chelsea Arts Club. To be a member of that, you have to be an author or a painter or a poet. You know, Madonna tried to join there and thought she could buy her way in. The membership were having none of it. She wasn't welcomed. You know, I have a friend who had a shop in Chelsea. It was called Voyage, and to get in the door, you had to be approved basically. And they didn't like Naomi Campbell, so they banned her. And I quite commend them for that. And you know, there are different ways and people do things, but no, these members clubs are very quirky, and they're each very different, and there are more kind of underground ones that are equally, you know, the same. So it doesn't have to be a high level of society. There's the highs and the lows, and the weird and the wonderful, and you can find clubs for anything, any number of things. There are groups of scientists who meet, and there are groups of, you know, whatever. In America, you've got the Bilderberg Club of all these wealthy people, and you've got, you know, all these people who meet in the forest and have these conventions about the environment. And you know, then you've got, for example, this Burning Man thing that's coming up. To get into that, you have to pay a fortune, and you're not guaranteed to get in. Look at the thing on Netflix, this Firefly Festival. It was a game which was a complete con. But all of these things are groups of people who come together for a reason, and they generally come together for a reason because they think they can benefit somehow from it.
So, A Nexus has put Soho House is a third-tier nouveau-riche royals and aristocrats.
Well, I would say it's more media. I would say it's more media than anything else. It's the media classes rather than the. It is very, you could say nouveau. Yes, there's plenty of people. It's, you know, there are places like Annabelle's in Mayfair, which used to be a nightclub, and now it's been bought by a man called Richard Caring, who owns most of the restaurants to the Ivy Group and Le Caprice, and which is closed down, but Daphne's, and he owns this group of clubs. And to get in, you have to be proposed and seconded. But there's, you know, a lot of Russian money and Chinese. You get in based on how rich you are, basically.
What about, is it the Gonzo or the Groucho or
the Groucho Club is more again to do with. It was more to do with theatre. So, you know, people like Stephen Burkoff, the actor, who I know very well, and but again, that's more into being a bit more like Soho House, because money talks now. Those places have sold out because they are generally owned by a private individual or a company. So ultimately, they have to be commercially viable as well. And to be commercially viable, you've got to have people coming who spend money. So, for example, in Mayfair, there was another place called the Arts Club, and that was in Dover Street, and it was a club for artists. And they could go there and they could have a sandwich. They had a very weird Danish restaurant. I don't know why the restaurant was Danish, but you go there and have a sort of pickled herring or whatever you wanted, and it was very, very cheap. A sandwich was about £3 or £4, which in a members club in London, and a glass of wine was probably £3 or something. And then it didn't do very well because all the old members were dying. So they sold to some very rich Indian people. And of course, the patron was Prince Philip. And he came to reopen it for these people, who turned it into a very smart, shishi club. and it was Prince Philip and Gwyneth Paltrow who came to reopen it. But Prince Philip was actually reopening a commercial venture. And I asked a lot of questions about this at the time because the royals are not meant to endorse commercial ventures. And, it was very, very sad because all these old members were told you can come back, but they couldn't afford to pay £25 for their sandwich. And that was the end of them. And now it's a very trendy place where the likes of Meghan Markle, for example, go. Well, she doesn't anymore now. She's in America, but that's where the kind of place she went before she got married. So, it's sad how those places have driven out the real characters. The Chelsea Arts Club still has that. It is a real mix of eccentrics.
So you mentioned earlier, and we know the FMs are patriarchal. You mentioned some of that earlier, gentlemen's clubs, but now you're saying about, Meghan Markle and stuff. Are they mostly men's only institutions, these places?
The likes of Soho House, no. These commercial ventures are very much aimed at younger people. There's none of that hierarchy. That hierarchy is gone. The likes of the Carlton Club now has female members. There probably are a couple of clubs that don't have female members left. But the affiliation of the Carlton Club is political. And the Garrick Club, I think, has rules about which rooms men and women are allowed in. And there are clubs there's one called White's, which is very aristocratic. And that's still got, women are only allowed in certain rooms on certain days still. So, yes, There is still discrimination in these places.
So we had a question up earlier that's gone off the screen, but I think the lady wanted your general thoughts on the McCann case and how long all this money is going to keep getting spent on this case.
Well, the McCann case is getting, again, more and more interesting because every day that goes by that they don't charge the German suspect, Christian Bruckner, is evidence that they haven't got anything on Christian Bruckner, in my view. And Mark Williams Thomas he went to Portugal and he corresponded with Christian Bruckner with a view to saying that he was the guilty party, but even he found that it didn't stack up. They're keeping him going as a distraction from looking at the real issue, which is why have they given £14 million to fund a search for somebody who simply won't be found? Because if she were going to be found, somebody would have traded in somebody by now, given all these rewards that were offered. And we're not talking £10,000 rewards like we get for some of the people we've talked about. So, for example, the reward with Stuart Lubbock, who, we interviewed the lady who was his one-time wife, and, that's a £40,000, £50,000 reward, and nothing's been done there. Now, the McCann case, we're talking rewards that are in the millions. Now, if you knew somebody who had taken that child, you would trade them in. It's a bit like the case that we've got at the moment in Liverpool with the poor child that was shot. The underworld, somebody will trade that person in because it's so high profile. No one's going to allow that to be forgotten. The McCann case is very, very strange, and there are too many people who associated themselves with it. So you've got prime ministers ranging from Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May. They've all supported the McCanns. Theresa May gave a party in Downing Street for the McCanns. If the McCanns were ever to be found guilty of anything, I'm not saying they will be, is that these people will end up looking very stupid. Likes of Philip Green, the likes of Richard Branson, they all offered very big rewards to help them. And all of these people have put a lot of effort into supporting them. And, the McCanns did associate with some strange people in the days after their child went missing. For example, Clement Freud, and they went and had their vodka and risotto with him. And, he was alleged to be a paedophile. Many people say he was. And, he's dead now, so we can't prove that one way or the other, but the allegations are there. And, the McCanns have had a misappropriation of resources, in my view, because there are other people who are missing. And in the last few days, a friend of mine went missing, and yesterday the Daily Mail thankfully covered the story. And he went missing. He's a 45-year-old person called William Cookson, and he disappeared from the 2nd of August. And I'm thankful to say today, my appeal and the Daily Mail's appeal has produced evidence that he was seen 10 days ago, which is a more recent sighting, which gives us all hope. And you can read about his story on my website and how he disappeared. He's a 45-year-old person who's had a number of issues in his life. But he's a very talented portrait painter, but he just vanished. And people can vanish, but in the case of the McCanns, that child has an unusual eye. There are so many people out there looking for it. Somebody would have traded in somebody if that child was still alive. And the ridiculous stories that come out about, we've seen it in a supermarket and this, that, and the other. They're never cited with a source. Nobody ever knows who gave this information. Yet the Metropolitan Police keep spending money on this. Why don't they help, for example, the family of Luke Durbin, whose son disappeared from Ipswich, and that's 10, 15 years ago, and his mother works for missing people. Why don't they help Kerry Needham, whose child disappeared in Greece? These are more ordinary people. Why don't they get help?
Yeah, and I just want to say that our hearts go out to the family of the 9-year-old girl in Liverpool, because imagine, you've just got a little daughter like that. One minute she's there, next minute she's dead. It's an absolute heinous, disgusting crime. Kev Warren, who was Michael Francese's bodyguard, he sent me a couple of clips yesterday when he was walking around Liverpool, his thoughts on the matter. And we have put a couple of our podcast guests out of Liverpool forward for the Piers Morgan Uncensored show, going out this week. Hopefully, their viewpoints will be expressed. And the bottom line is, the war on drugs and drug laws, I believe, are a root cause of all of this. The violence of the drug.
It's very sad that a family who were totally innocent were dragged into this because of a war between probably drug lords, and that they were dragged into this, and they came into invaded their house and killed their child.
Yeah, it's a function. It's an iron law of economics that the most violent gang will control the drug market. So there's been an arms race amongst these gangs all over the world, as we've seen with the cartels, whereby people are now, the whole families now are tortured, and it's put online. The mafia in the old days, you don't harm women, don't harm kids. It's all out the window. Now there's an arms race whereby whoever commits the most extreme violence will maximize their profits from the drug market. And what is the most traded drug in the world? Weed. And it is an absolute crime that the government continues to allow criminals to run, control, and fight over this black market that is generating billions a year. The black market in drugs is estimated at $1 trillion a year right now. Billions a year in profits getting handed over to gangs who can arm themselves to the teeth and commit these heinous crimes. So the government needs to look at its own policies instead of just being a reactionary entity that wants to make headline news, throw all these police on the streets, pretend to be tough on crime, pretend to be clamping down, when they can damn well go back and address the root cause of what's causing this in the first place.
I quite agree with you. I think it's a disgrace.
And it's only going to get worse. All right, on a lighter note then, Maid Marian Matthew has asked, what do you think about Anthony Joshua losing the boxing match the other night?
I can't say I'm an expert on boxing, but it all sounds rather a mess, and I don't think I can really answer any more than that.
Yeah, and Tyson Fury's demanding what, a massive fee now to fight Usyk, and I think he'll be the one who's going to sweep all these belts. Are you a Tyson Fury fan, Matthew?
Sorry?
Are you a Tyson Fury fan, Matthew?
I think that the man is definitely a character, and I have to say, you know, I coming from near where he lives in Morecambe in Lancashire. I used to live near there. Um, you know, I think the community there is very much behind him, and I think he's you know he's someone who's turned his life around and made something of himself. So yes, I would root for him. Yes.
He is an absolute legend and a character, and we'd love to get him on the podcast at some point. So the Jolly Man, I mean, this. If you've just tuned in, it's Ask Matthew Anything, AMA, and the Jolly Man's got
So
an
we're back
interesting
to
one here.
pagans, are we?
Did ancient civilizations become cannibalistic and into human sacrifice, or did they follow the sun?
Well, the people I witnessed on the beach here in Broadstairs on the summer solstice were very much sun worshippers. There are supposedly a coven of Wiccans down here, and they gather in the woods and do whatever they do. Now, I don't think these people harm anything, and but I don't know much about their activities. You know, you do read about people using such things for purposes of bad, but I think they're mostly harmless.
T. O'Shaughnessy would like to know, Matthew, what drew you to true crime in the first place? Where did it all start?
Well, I think the first time I experienced true crime was when I was a child, and we were going to a wedding of my aunt's close friend, and we were driving to Oxfordshire, and we stayed somewhere, and I was with my grandmother and my mother, and we were in a holiday cottage that we were renting, and it came on the television that the lady we were due to go to this marriage of had been shot with a crossbow, and she was murdered, and her murder has never been solved. Her late name was Diana Moores. You won't find much about her on the internet, but it was a very unusual killing in West London. She to be killed with a crossbow, and it kind of scared me and made me think about things. And I was very young, and that stuck in my mind. And then gradually, more and more of these cases started to. I read about things. I used to love Miss Marple. Miss Marple was my Sunday evening viewing by the fireside, and I loved the theme tune, and I loved the way that she solved simple crimes.
Princess Diana Boston breaks. Is that
well, I think the big problem with the death of Princess Diana is the fact that the bodyguard appeared to have been, you know, drinking or intoxicated. The car that Mohammed Fayed had supplied had been chopped up. It was a car that had lots of problems. If she had taken royal bodyguards, things may have been rather different to the amateurish people who drove her in that tunnel. Now, the thing about the Fiat Panda, that's very bizarre. Yes, the man disappearing and he's dead, and there are many theories about it, but again, I can't answer that because I don't know. I think there are many strange things. She believed that someone would kill her, and a car accident was something she talked about. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, as you know, so I don't know.
Well, there's an endless fascination with secret societies on this channel, and Zaref the Alchemist would like your thoughts on the Club of Rome, the Bilderbergs, and the RIIA.
I think that the likes of Bilderberg are groups of very powerful people who come together, and they do change the world. And whether they change it for the benefit of you or I is very questionable. And you know, I've written in the past about a man who owns a thing you may have read called Breitbart, which is a right-wing channel, and he funds things in Britain like the Taxpayers Alliance, which has nothing to do with supporting taxpayers. It's a lobby group for the likes of Nigel Farage's friends, and his name is Robert Mercer. And these people have more powerful than prime ministers and presidents. And when they come together, they get things done their way. And you know, a lot of people on your channel talk about the Rothschilds, and yes, the likes of Rothschild linked to a lot of these people. And we won't talk about, you know, the lady who I've written most about, but they all link together. Yes.
What about Klaus Schwab? Does Klaus This Klaus Schwab guy, what are your thoughts on him?
Another person with too many connections. So, when you get to these connections, I will see if I can quickly find you. In fact, I do things like that.
Good grief. Is
I
that the
put
inside of your
together,
is that the inside of your brain right there,
that's
externalized?
my mind map, and I put together the connections between these people. And, some connections are weak and some are much stronger, but these people all come together when it suits them to benefit themselves and their connections. And that is
Did
a sometimes it can be for the good of the world. Sometimes it's most definitely not.
what about when
The
Alex Jones
Bakeland
and
family. Yes, the Bakeland family were a very interesting family, and I have written quite a bit about that. Um, if you're interested in that, you should watch a film with Julianne Moore and Eddie Redmayne. It's called Savage Grace. So Anthony Bakeland was the son of an American lady who was an actress who married the heir to the Bakelite plastic fortune. And they were very sociable people. They were very strange people. They had very warped morals. It was in the 1950s or 60s. And they traveled extensively. They moved to London and they brought this child with them. The child was very strange. It used to pull the wings off butterflies, and it was obsessed with its dog. And when its dog died, it slept with its dog's collar forevermore. And the boy was clearly gay, but his mother didn't like him being gay. So the mother decided to sleep with her own son to try and make him straight, which was a very strange thing to do. And meanwhile, he was bringing home his school friends, and they lived in Cadogan Square. And the father took a liking to one of these children and eventually ended up living or marrying one of them. And that made the child even more angry. And the whole series of events occurred. And ultimately, one night, the boy, who was called Anthony Bakeland, decided to murder his mother. And he tried to throw her under a car previously. She'd been to see a psychiatrist who'd said, "Be warned, this child will kill you." And she said, "No, it won't." And anyway, the child eventually killed the mother. And then he didn't ring the police, he rang for a Chinese takeaway. And eventually the police came and he was locked up. And because of all these well-meaning rich people, he was allowed out. And on the condition he went back to America, and he was put on a plane with a minder to take him there. And he told the minder, "I will kill my grandmother," because he was going to live with her. He stabbed her, I think, 47 times. Somehow she miraculously survived. He was put in Rikers Island, and again, he thought he would get out because of all the well-meaning friends. And he was told, "You won't be getting out," and then he killed himself. So it was a very tragic story of wealth. And there were people, the parents were friends with people like Pablo Picasso, and all sorts of people, Warhol. And it was a very hard. But this child had a warped upbringing, and the story is very well told in this film, Savage Grace, which I urge people to watch.
I need to watch that. What a fantastic question and an unexpectedly harrowing answer.
Yes.
Project Reject, Matthew. The World Economic Forum is financially backed by Lucis Trust, founded by Alice Bailey, originally called Lucifer Trust. Any veracity to that?
I don't know the specifics of that, but yes, these trusts all have very odd backgrounds and odd people involved in them. And I've been sent something by the lady who we talked with in the past, Kirby Summers, and we won't go into what she talked mostly about, but I'm looking into something with her of a similar nature. And there are connections with the likes of Freemasonry and heaven and hell and all these kind of things. And yes, they do have odd names, a lot of them.
What are your thoughts on the murder of Jill Dando? This is from Robert Marshall.
Well, the murder of Jill Dando interested me in some ways because obviously my mother and my aunt's friend, Diana Moores, was shot with a crossbow on her doorstep in West London at a similar, slightly earlier, but you know, that sort of time. And it was a similar sort of aged woman of connections of the similar type. And the Jill Dando matter is more complicated in that, you know, she was the Crime Watch presenter and she talked about Bosnia, and they say it was a warlord perhaps. And then there was her links to her knowledge of Jimmy Savile. You know, she had spoken out about Jimmy Savile. You know, she was connected to all sorts of people. You know, she had a friendship with Jeffrey Archer. You know, she knew all sorts. She had a husband, fiance who seemed like a successful man, and you know, there were all sorts of people with motive. And I feel sorry for that poor man who was falsely imprisoned, because you know they clearly pinned it on him just to try and shut the whole matter down. Now, again, we don't know the truth of it, but it's definitely more likely linked to her work on Crime Watch than it was to anything else.
Is that a bit like they pinned it on Jeremy Bamber to shut the whole matter down?
Well, again, I was on there the discussion with the people we talked with the other day, Philip and Yvonne, and you know, again, you look at the police records and the way things were handled. Now, I don't know whether he was innocent or guilty, but I think there is a need for a reinvestigation of such a story because, you know, the police burned evidence. They took it home with them and they destroyed it. Why would you do that if you didn't have something to hide?
So with this next question, and Ash has sent in a reminder for us not to mention the grand old Duke of York in your response to this one, or to skirt around it somehow.
Yes.
Maybe just say the Duke perhaps. So any info on the girl found drowned in a pond at Sandringham?
I don't know what became of that story, but yes, there was a person who drowned there, and there was or was found dead there. But you know, people are found dead in many different places, and you know, it's a vast estate of 30,000 or something acres. So it could be purely coincidental, or it could be something more sinister. But you know, I was looking up at the weekend because of my friend being missing. I looked up the missing persons unit, and I was shocked, and I'm sure you've obviously seen such things yourself, but the number of people whose bodies are found in this country and nobody knows who they are. You know, some of the people listed on this site, it just said, looked like a vagrant, found with a set of keys, don't know who they are, might be about 50 years old. And that's how they're marked down. And, you know, isn't it sad that that's how somebody could be remembered, and people out there don't even look for them? And,
wow.
You know, with the case of Luke Durbin, the boy who disappeared in Ipswich, they recently found remains in a river near there. And, of course, immediately the people thought maybe it was him, or maybe they thought it was this Corrie McKeague, who was the airman who went missing, who they've recently had the big inquest into. And it wasn't. It was somebody else, and nobody knows who it is. So with the case of the girl in the pond, I don't know what became of that, because I've never heard any more, which suggests they don't even know who it was. But I may be wrong. Maybe there is more on that I haven't heard about.
What are your thoughts about people printing out guns at home using 3D printers?
Well, I think that's highly irresponsible. I don't think that should be encouraged by anybody. I think we need to be very careful about guns, and you know, you don't have to look at the situation in America. I'm not an anti-gun person, but I think the way in which people are encouraged to use guns should be monitored, and be, you know, we should be careful about it. You know, we have less gun crime here, that is because of the way the gun laws are compared to America. But you know, I think it's again about who controls the gun. You know, if you get a bad person with a gun, you only look at what happened in Dunblane, and again that links back to the Freemasonry stuff with that man's connections. And you know, if you allow a bad person to get hold of a gun, then bad things are going to happen.
What's the worst criminal you've come across? Well, we did a documentary on Savile, didn't we? So that's one of the worst.
Well, but that's not somebody I've actually met.
Okay.
Are they saying the worst person I've ever met?
Perhaps that is the question. Yep.
Gosh, I think the strangest I met was a waiter who I knew in a restaurant in Chelsea, and he was a nice, innocent person, but I couldn't fathom why he was able to afford to live in an apartment around the corner from the restaurant. And he had a girlfriend who seemed very attractive and a little older than him, and she had a child. And one night he left the restaurant, and I remember sitting and having a drink with the staff, and I remember him leaving, and he went home and he discovered her with somebody else, and basically she had worked as a prostitute, and that was how they afforded to live the way they did. And he didn't realize this. I think he was a little naive, and he killed her and tried to kill the child. And he wrote to me from prison on remand and asked if I would support him, and I couldn't fathom why I would want to support such a person after what he did to this woman and her child, because the child was very lucky to live. And yes, people have moments of intense passion, but that was awful what happened there, and I was horrified by it. But I've spoken with people who, you know, I've corresponded with other people in prison who have done very bad things, and people who I believe to be innocent. And again, you know, the case of Mark Alexander, I think there's somebody who has never admitted his guilt and is being tortured in prison as a result, and it's totally wrong. And I think there are cases of grave injustice out there, and you know about this more than anything else. For all these people that are very guilty and should be in there forever and ever, there are people who really have been put in the wrong place, and it's absolutely terrible.
Matthew, you've been a gentleman as usual during this AMA. We're going to have to do an AMA part 2. Ask Matthew anything part 2. And well, the answers.
To fill in, but I'm sorry I'm not as exciting a guest as the other one. But
well, everybody has been absolutely delighted with you stepping in and taking all these questions, and a huge thank you to all the viewers as well. I'll be back in 30 minutes with a dark journalist, and please support Matthew at the Steeples Times. Links will be in the description box. You're welcome to pester him on Twitter, send in questions, stalk him. He tries to give everybody a response. His Twitter handle's down there. And again, have a great rest of your day on the South Coast, Matthew.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
See you, Matthew.
Okay, bye-bye.
Cheerio.